Okay.
All right, welcome back to the Reality Show Life Coach podcast. I am your host, certified life coach Lynn Grogan, and today we're going to talk about season 45, episode 2 of Survivor. And with me today, I have very special guest, Kristin Brown. Kristin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Kristin Brown. I am a marketing strategist. I help coaches and other online entrepreneurs or kind of organize their chaotic marketing efforts into a more streamlined and strategic plan so they can have a steady stream of clients like everyone wants. So, and I also think it's really important to make sure it's a fun and enjoyable marketing plan too. So focus on that as well.
And this is what I have come to love about you, amongst other things. You're like one of my favorite people to talk to on a regular
Oh,
basis. We used to work together and now we just get to now that we no longer have that, we just get to be friends with each other, which is like the best future that I could
I
have
know.
imagined.
I know. I love chatting with you about anything, including Survivor. I'm a huge Survivor fan, so I was thrilled to be able to do this podcast with you.
Is it weird that when I learned this about you that you love Survivor, I was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna like her.
No, because it tells you about somebody. It tells you, I don't know exactly what it tells you, but something good.
Yeah, I decided I was gonna like you a whole lot. So,
It
so
was
of course
also
I thought
like
of
when
you
we
for
both
this.
found out, we also both found out that like our first jobs were at Subway, right? That was
Hmm.
one of
Hmm.
those
This
other
is
random similarities.
we have like sandwich artist survivor bonding. It's a wonderful
Exactly.
thing.
Oh, yeah.
Well, okay, so let's do a show recap. I think you saw in the notes I missed the first 10 minutes. We had TV shenanigans over here, so I'm gonna let you cover the first 10 minutes and then I'll do the recap for the rest of the episode. What happened in the first 10
Okay.
minutes, Kristen?
Well, I guess if you missed the first 10 minutes, then you missed the big news that they brought back the like Survivor theme music, like with the credits and the players in their like heroic poses. So that was fun. Mostly it was like kind of the tribal council recap. Austin from the Red Tribe was working on deciphering his clue, and he actually did, but he still has no vote because he hasn't actually found his idol yet. Um, and I think you probably saw part of this. I think the only other notable thing in the first 10 minutes was Bruce continuing to kind of be obnoxious on his tribe.
Bruce being very Brucey.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, I mean, and that's what I think I like about this longer 90-minute episode though, is they
Yeah.
showed so many more camp interactions because that's where
I
I
love
picked up.
that.
I assumed there was a reward challenge at the beginning, but maybe there wasn't. I picked up where they were doing some idol searches. People were getting annoying. By people, I mean Bruce.
Yeah.
And alliances are forming. Just a lot of the camp stuff that I feel like we were missing when it was just a 60-minute episode. I don't know if you felt
Mhm.
that way.
Yes, I'm loving having more time to dive into some of that stuff. And I feel like that's the kind of stuff we used to get when the game was like a slower pace. And now that there's so much going on, some of that got cut out. So I love the camp life edition.
Yeah, me too. And so we see them on the camp, and then these boats arrive. And of course, they're going to take one person from each tribe off somewhere. I mean, we've seen in the last couple seasons that this usually means that they have a challenge where they get to opt in or out. And if they lose, which is what the case was here, then they lose their vote. And so we saw Bruce decided not to play, which actually did
Mhm.
that surprised me a little bit. I don't know about you.
Yeah, me too. I wouldn't have thought he would be the kind to be that conservative, I guess.
Yeah. So maybe he's not trusting his fun drunk uncle role as much as he seems to be.
I don't know. Yeah,
Oh,
I always feel like you got to do it. You got to at least try it. I mean,
I
yeah, you might,
know.
you'll lose your vote, and that's a risk. Oh, you're on Survivor. Take the risk.
Go for it. Yeah, you've already been off the show once and came back, Bruce. Like, why not?
Yes. Live it
So,
up.
live it up. We have Drew from the red team who risked his vote and he got the advantage. And then we have Brandon from the yellow team who risked it and lost his vote,
Poor
unfortunately.
Brendan.
Um, I know. And this is coming off the heels of him, what was it last week, handing his Beware advantage to somebody else because he's like, I cannot risk my vote. Maybe that was this episode, actually. It's
It was
blurring
this
together.
episode.
Mhm.
Yeah. he's, I just feel like he's not, he's just had a hard run of luck the last, I mean, the 2 episodes that we've watched. It's been tough for
Yeah.
Brandon all the way around.
It's been tough for him, and it gets tougher as the episode goes on because the yellow team, the Lulu losers, as they called them last week,
Oh,
do not win immunity, and they do go to tribal, and Brandon is voted out. And I know we're going to talk about that today. So I think that's a highlight reel from this episode. Am I
yeah.
missing anything before we jump into like coachable moments?
No, I think that's a good overview and we can dig into some of the details.
It feels like a little bit like wah wah wah. It's like
I
Brandon wah
know.
wah. But
Poor
um
Brandon.
well, I mean, most of this episode they do feature the yellow team because they are having a time of it. But um well, do you want to talk about Emily first from the yellow team?
Sure. Yeah, I always think, it must really suck to be on the losing tribe, but the consolation prize is that you get a lot of TV time when it comes to the show being aired. They're the ones that people are getting to see the most on TV. So something about that, I guess. But yeah, I thought Emily was super interesting this episode because in the last episode, we kind of had a certain impression of her, just pretty aggressive, pretty bold and straightforward with her opinions and kind of rubbing people the wrong way. And I think after surviving that first tribal council, kind of only because Hannah wanted to leave, that now she has kind of like has this opportunity to make a shift and pivot her strategy a little bit to something that might actually work because this is clearly not working for her. So I thought she was really fascinating in this episode, kind of watching her shift and figure out how she wanted to be and how she could still be herself, but kind of just make those adjustments so she could fit into the tribe, gain their trust, and actually survive the next tribal council, which she luckily does. Like I think I'm really impressed that she was able to work her way into staying after what seemed like an obvious vote out last week.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think what caught my attention here too is like how she was able to do it though, because it didn't seem like inauthentic, which is you can sometimes see like I need to pivot, this isn't working. But
Mm-hmm.
like there's this moment where she's having this conversation with Caleb and he totally seemed like coach role. I was like, this
Yeah.
this appeals to the life coach in me of what he's like,
Yes.
offering to her. He was just sharing his observations of like her gameplay and how it wasn't working at all, which I don't know. It was interesting for me to watch that though, because, in the real world, if somebody came up to you, somebody that let's say your colleague, and was just like, hey, just so you know, you're really aggressive.
Yeah.
Like, what? I mean, most people would probably be a little bit like defensive or feel attacked, but just to watch her be like so open, and I don't know, maybe like we don't see clips of her kind of taking this hard, but she like is open for it and like she's a sponge for it, which I thought was fascinating because I wouldn't have expected that from somebody who is as aggressive as her like last week.
Yeah, I kind of wondered as I was watching that scene with her and Caleb if we were going to cut to a talking head of her being like, "Oh my gosh, Caleb trying to
Mhm.
tell me what to do, tell me how to make this better, like I'm fine," kind of thing. But she wasn't. She was super humble about accepting that he was trying to help, and I think he really was coming from a genuine place, and you can sense that with people. And I think he was smart to use that opportunity to befriend her and build trust with her, and I think that can totally benefit him throughout the game because when you're in that low position like she was in, like just feeling like you're at the bottom of the tribe and you're the next one to go unless something changes, like you're kind of desperate and vulnerable. And then in swoops Caleb and he's just ready to kind of hold her hand and talk her through it. And so, yeah, I was impressed that she was willing to be to kind of trust him and to hear what he was saying and make some adjustments. And then I was also impressed that Caleb was able to do it in such a kind way.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. It did seem very kind. And I think I was also kind of intrigued too, because a lot of this episode we see people, maybe they seem a little bit more chill this episode than the last one. Maybe they're a little bit calmer. But like when you're in this like stressed out state, Like it would be so hard to hear what somebody like Caleb was saying and absorb it in the way that she did because you're
Mhm.
just like, "Oh my gosh, I got to change quickly in order to like be liked by all these people." And you just kind of you're like you just see her kind of slowly like going, "Oh, I see." I think she even at the end of the episode she said, "I was trying to play my entire Survivor game in the first 3 days." Um
Right.
but yeah, I don't know. It's one of those I feel like people can really relate to. I mean, I didn't find her very relatable last week at all. I was just like, who
Yeah.
is this person? Why is she like coming in like guns blazing? And now this week it was like, oh, I can totally relate to that because, I don't know about you, but I've had moments in my life where somebody has pulled me aside and said, "Hey, just so you know, this is how you're being received." And like if it is delivered from kind of a kind and helpful manner, like he did not seem like he was trying to manipulate her at all. Like it's like, oh, if you can be in that place of saying thank you for telling me, you can get so like her whole game changed because of it.
Yeah. I can't wait to see how far she gets in the game after surviving these first two tribal councils kind of by the skin of her teeth. Because if she does manage to go far, like she really owes it to Caleb, I think, to kind of help her recalibrate her position.
Yeah. Yeah, and it shows like how adaptable she is. If she can change that much within the 5 days, it's like, okay, what else is she going to do? Because I think one of the things is people come in here with this idea of who they're going to be, but
Yeah.
like, but then you're paired up with all these other people, and like, I don't like our identities changed based on the
Yeah.
scenarios you're in. When you and I were colleagues, we related to each other in one way, and now we're friends, and so we relate to each other in another way. You at church is different than like you as a mom, as you as a wife, all of those things, and so it's like you can decide you're going to be one way on the show, but then you have like these different people that you're surrounding yourself with, and you can kind of like dial up and dial down different aspects of your personality based on the people around you.
Yeah. And I kind of thought this is kind of jumping ahead to something that Jeff said in the tribal council, which I thought was so interesting when he told Caleb that he was basically like the water boy for the team. Like when Jeff didn't make the high school basketball team, but they let him be the water boy because he's fun and likable and they
Yeah.
wanted him around. He's enthusiastic. And I started thinking, like, yeah, Brandon's over there at tribal council trying to convince them, like, yeah, I actually am good at puzzles. I can do better at the challenges. Like, I don't know what's going on. I've just had a few bad days. But Jeff's saying, like, no, be the water boy. Like, that's your secret weapon. Use that. Use that to your advantage to get people to want to keep you because they already were saying, he's loyal. He's the one we want to keep because we can trust him, whereas we can't trust Emily. And so I think that idea of like everybody having a secret weapon really plays into what you're saying about like using who you are. You come in with the personality that you have and dialing up or dialing down certain parts of it, but also kind of being self-aware enough to know like what is my secret weapon or what do I think my secret weapon is, and then adapting as the game demands and as your relationships with the other players demand, and just kind of being able to watch and see what's working, what's not working. Because maybe on a different tribe, Emily being that aggressive would be an effective secret weapon. Not with this tribe, not so far. Or maybe there's another way to play it where she can still be bold, still be assertive, but in a way that works with the tribe. So I just think that's a really interesting part of the game is watching people decide how they're going to be, what they're going to use about themselves, and where they take it too far and trying to kind of like pretend, like I feel like Bruce is, versus where they can just be totally authentic and say, this is who I am.
Yeah. Do you think there's any like fear for any of the players just to be themselves out there? Because I don't know, like as you were saying that, I'm like, wow, there's almost like there could be a certain amount of control that you feel by like, this is the role that I'm playing, and here's how I'm going to play it with these different people. But just being yourself is like, it's almost like, I've put on my sweatpants and now I can relax. Like, I wonder if for any of
Yeah,
them that feels a little bit like unsettling because it's just like, no, 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 but I got to be on. And
right.
almost like when I think about being on, it's like, oh, I've got to be on stage. And when I'm on stage, I'm acting a role. Like, I wonder if there's any elements of that for people.
Yeah, and it takes so much out of you when you have to be on. Even if you're being authentic, it's still exhausting. Like I used to be a wedding photographer, and I remember like at the end of a wedding day, it's not like I wasn't being myself when I was out there directing and, yelling at the, at the group, like, you stand here, turn this way, turn that way. That was all me. But at the end of the day, I was just completely drained. And I had to go be me in a different way, which was go be alone in a quiet room for a while and recover from that level of extroversion. So I can't imagine being on Survivor and doing that, like just not ever feeling like you can relax and just be who you actually are.
Mm-mm.
Oh, I think that sounds really hard.
Many, many days in a row. Yeah. And it's and like Emily is in transition as that's going on. Like that's exhausting in and of itself. I don't know about you, but it's like
Yeah.
sometimes I get coached and I was like, "Phew," you have this like
Yeah.
aha moment. It's like, yeah. But then there's also this part that's a little bit tiring because you're like, okay, now that I know this, I want to like go about life a little bit differently. But then you're changing, which is uncomfortable, and the game itself is uncomfortable. So I don't know. I think
Yeah.
doing this podcast thus far, specifically on this show, is like I don't know, it's given me a different appreciation for the game because now I'm not just watching as a viewer. I'm like also as we like try to get into their heads and think about what the experience would be like for them. I'm like I'm in so much more awe of all these cast members.
Yeah. And it is really interesting to think that nothing is as straightforward as you think it is when you're watching at home on the couch. You're watching the players in real time have to decide when to be real, when to be honest, when to lie, when to fib a little bit. Like how do you and also trying to ascertain whether the person you're talking to is telling the truth or fibbing or completely flat out lying to you. There's so much going on that I mean, it's just got to be so draining. And then strategy on top of that, there's so many levels
Yeah.
to the game. And even like when it comes to the idols or the advantages or whatever, deciding really quickly, do I tell my alliance member that I found this advantage or do I keep it to myself? Like in this episode, they were all telling each other everything. Nobody's keeping anything to themselves. And I'm always wondering, like, was that intentional or was that an in the moment decision that you later regretted? How much is strategy versus like stressful in the moment? Well, I'll just do this. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe that makes sense. Let's talk about that. So they have that boat trip, and we didn't really see how Bruce necessarily like, we saw mostly, I think, Drew when he came back to camp. He was like, "Hey guys, I got this advantage," and it's like all of them sitting around. He told them exactly like what he won from the advantage. He said he would, whatever this promise means, but he said he would like use it on any of them if they got to the point where it was needed for a team member. Um, and like usually in Survivor, when you see that happen, you're just like, no, don't tell everybody the things. But um, I don't know. I was just like really thinking about this, like in this day and age, just like in the real world, I think people are just much more, I don't want to say suspicious, but I don't know. I think we're just so much more, I don't know, in the last couple of years, hyper aware of when people are BSing us or we feel like we're being gaslit and lied to. And
Yeah.
I think there's a respect for people now that are like, even if you don't like what they have to say, thank you for telling the truth. And so it just makes me wonder if any of his approach to this is coming from kind of these trends that we've been seeing, or maybe I've just been seeing it. I don't know, but I feel like there's more a newfound appreciation for people who can tell the truth out in public.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it's something I think I've seen it just kind of generally in the world too. Like the whole social media being the highlight reel kind of thing. Like we're kind of tired of that. We just want to see who you really are, what you're really like, what you really think. And I always think what's so fascinating about Survivor is the way it really is kind of like that microcosm of the outside world. You just grab all these people from all over the place and put them together and see what happens. So, yeah, I think I'll be interested to see how much that continues as the game progresses, like the season progresses. But also, you watch kind of trends come and go in Survivor itself. Like sometimes the players really are more secretive for a phase, and that might change the game a certain way versus more open. And I think what's one of the fun things about Survivor is kind of watching the game adapt across seasons in response to how the players are playing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and you also have to wonder too, because you see it in right after Drew announces that, like, almost one of the next scenes is he's walking on the beach with Austin, and Austin's like, I want to tell you, I got this beware advantage. So
Yeah.
is it, I think, because as human, we mirror each other and we often want to reciprocate. It's like, okay, maybe because we started out with people telling the truth in this way, we'll see more people. It's like you're looking around and you're going, how do I behave in this environment? Oh, people are telling the truth. I guess I'll tell the truth. On seasons where people are super secretive, it's like, oh, people keep secrets. And
Hmm.
so I think and because there's no the culture, like survivor culture, because every game is so different, you have to just kind of create your tribe culture across the board. And I think it's just happens organically as the show goes on. So it's not like out of all the things they can design with the game throughout the year that they're planning it, this is the one thing they can't. They can just pick the players, but they have no idea how the players are going to play. And so they're creating their own culture as they go.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you have certain opportunities when you're on a winning tribe versus a losing tribe. And I guess there's probably opportunities when you're on a losing tribe. So I think it's a different thing for Drew to come in and say exactly what happened. He has kind of like the luxury of being able to be totally honest because he knows they're in a position of strength. Like they're probably not going to lose the next challenge. They're probably not going to go to tribal council. And if they do, he feels confident in his position in the tribe. And so he's able to make that decision to share from a place of strength versus Brandon, who it's like, you're on a losing tribe, you're at the bottom of a losing tribe. Like maybe you think you're okay, maybe not, but you're kind of just, first of all, you're just making that decision from a different place. But second of all, it's really hard to be rational when you're, I mean, not just losing, but starving, so tired, stressed out. He told us how anxious he was. Like, I just think it's so much harder to be strategic when you're in that position versus the position Drew was in.
Yeah, I would say so. And I do wonder to like what extent Brandon thinks of himself as like kind of an underdog, or like you wonder if like he went into Survivor going, yeah, I'm probably gonna be on that team that doesn't perform as
Yeah.
well. Like whereas you get somebody like Caleb who's on the yellow team who's probably pretty used to like succeeding athletically, and so it's like confusing for him probably to be on that type of team. But for Brandon, he's probably like, yeah, this is like kind of how things go. And I don't know. So him coming back and telling the truth, like that feels maybe aligned. That seems maybe aligned based on the way that they've portrayed him through his edits.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how that's going to play out for all of them telling the truth. I mean, well, Brandon's gone, so we know how that played out for him.
Yeah.
But Drew, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. I think Drew's going to be an interesting one to watch. I'll be interested to see how long he lasts and how he does.
Yeah, he seems to think he'll get to the end. I have a feeling though
Yeah.
he's going to be one of those players where they're like, "Oh, Drew's playing very
Gotta,
strategically."
yeah. Gotta get rid of him.
Absolutely. Well, let's see. What do we got next? Well, you had some really good points here about, well, Brandon, we've talked about a little bit, but I think you had an interesting angle here on like the underperforming. Did you want to talk about that?
Sure. I just am always curious, like ever since kind of being exposed to the coaching world years ago, I'm always much more aware and observant about how people change how they act because of what they're thinking. Like that's kind of like the whole thing about coaching. Like why are you doing what you do? We can kind of trace it back to what you're thinking. And so I do wonder, say Brandon is on the red team and someone from the red team ends up on the yellow team and Brandon is on a winning team and he thinks he's good at puzzles. And so if he's on a winning team and he's doing well there, is he better at puzzles? Like does he actually perform as well as he thought he would at the puzzle challenges? Does he, like, how does that change what actually happens for him? Just this one thing of being on a winning tribe. And it's not just that you're on a winning tribe, it's that when you're on a winning tribe, you're thinking differently. You're much more confident, you're much more relaxed, you're able to be more of who you are. And so I don't really doubt that he just I think he was just so baffled, like, I thought I was gonna be the puzzle guy. And like his team was like, you said you could do puzzles. He can't. And he's like, I thought I could. And I just thought, when it's like, I I grew up playing the piano, and when I didn't know how to name this when I was a kid, but when I would do performances, if I was super nervous, I would mess up more. And if I was really confident in what I was doing, it would go great. And I didn't understand it until I got into the coaching world where it's like, yeah, there's a reason for that. It's not just a coincidence. You performed worse because you were nervous, because you were doubting yourself, because you thought you were going to mess up. So then you did. So I just think it's so fascinating to watch somebody on TV just kind of derail themselves because they can't really get control of what they're thinking.
Yeah. Well, I think this is why there's like a whole world of like high like performance coaching,
Hmm.
for athletes and, musicians and other people that are like doing things that are like under high levels of stress because I think Brandon probably is good at puzzles, but it's like, hey, have you ever done a puzzle where $1 million was on the line, your team may or may not win. And oh, also there's cameras everywhere pointing at you and you're going to be on TV doing this. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
like you can be good at puzzles at home, but not, in this regard. So, but yeah, I hear you
And
on
you're
that.
starving and tired.
Yeah, I mean, I know that for myself, it's like any situation where I feel like somebody is watching me and I'm being evaluated, oh man, I go into total freeze. It's like, oh, oh, even if it's something I'm good
Yeah.
at, it's like
Yeah.
something happens in our brains. Totally.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and it's something that like I've tried to work on with myself to really try to harness the power that comes from being confident, and not like, irrationally confident or overconfident, but just kind of neutral confidence, maybe is a good way to say it, versus, just going into some sort of like, if it's a speaking engagement or just something that you're uncomfortable with or unfamiliar with, trying to get a handle on that self-doubt as much as you can so that you can perform at your best rather than, I mean, it's like most of the time we can get through stuff and even maybe even perform well when we're doubting ourselves, but how much better could we do when we're able to gain control over those thoughts and get our bodies to also like believe, like buy into the fact that we're okay. My brain believes I'm okay, so then my body can believe I'm okay. Okay, I can do this.
Yeah. Oh man, I know. And I don't it's like, can we just learn just by exposing ourselves? I don't know. I mean, for some people, like for Brandon, it might just be like traumatizing if you go through it over and over again. So, but yeah, I think it's something that I'm like actively working on right now. Like I'm in like a coach like kind of like training things. I've coached for many years. I feel very confident in my skills. Put me in a one-on-one situation, amazing group situation, amazing. But I'm in this group where it's like, oh, there's evaluation, people are watching. I just went into it like this is gonna be great, kind of like what Brandon did. I'm the puzzle guy, I'm the coach girl, whatever. And the first time I just like, got in a situation where I'm like, oh, okay, like, oh yeah, I'll coach, whatever. It was like, oh, and it was so surprising for me. It was just like surprising slash mortifying because I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like usually so good at this. You just assume that your skills are going to translate into that other arena. And
Right.
yeah, so the way I'm working through it is like last week, point blank in the group, I was just like, raise my hand and I was like, here's what I'm dealing with. I just said it, which is kind of been Brandon's approach, right? He's just kind of like,
Yeah.
yep, I'm alive, guys. So but yeah, I think we all do it different ways, but I'm just like, I think for me, it's some like degree of honesty. Like, oh yeah, this is what I'm going through. This is totally normal. I don't have to judge myself for it. Um, I'm saying all this because I have no idea what's going on in Brandon's head as he goes through this. But yeah, for me, it was kind of like normalizing and like just and then just deciding on purpose ahead of time, like, you know what, I'm going to try this X amount more and I may freeze up again. And if that
Yeah.
happens, like, here are the strategies I'm going to use to like slow things down and help myself feel safe in that environment. but but yeah, I mean, I think it can be really surprising, especially if it's something that you identify as like, I'm skilled in this over here. You put yourself in a new environment and like, I think it's worth acknowledging this is a brand new environment. Of course, the thing I'm usually good at, I'm going to have to learn how to do it in that environment. It might be a lot different.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to transfer that to Survivor where you really have to think how honest to be. And I think that what you're saying, this is one of those areas that I think would be really beneficial to just be honest with your tribe, where it's still, a tribe game. You're not on your own yet. Hopefully you can kind of trust those people with this, like, I'm struggling here. Like, and kind of almost like Emily did, like just being open to like, what do you think? Like, what should I do about this? Like, I thought I could do it this way and it's not working. I don't know what to do. And sometimes just like opening yourself up in that way, just like you said, just kind of diffuses the fear around it and gives you the support if other people can help you through it.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Well, and I think too is that like people are looking for you to be vulnerable. It's the perfect strategic person
Yeah.
that people are suspicious of on this show.
Right.
But if you can be
Yeah.
vulnerable,
That's
it's
what's
like, oh, we
scary.
can connect. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really true. And, you know, you can obviously take that too far. You can be too honest. You can be too vulnerable, all those things. But yeah, I think especially in this way, like, do you remember last season, at the end of the game when Carson and Jam Jam was helping Carson with the
Yeah.
fire? It's like that was such like a true vulnerable moment for Carson to just kind of like fall apart and need Jam Jam's help. And I think that's kind of it when you can be like authentically vulnerable, it does allow that strong connection to form. And maybe that gets you closer to $1 million, maybe not. But the players are always talking about like how powerful the relationships are that they walk away with, and how when you're in that environment, it's just so it's just by nature a vulnerable environment to be in. And so yeah, it does lend itself to creating these really strong relationships.
Yeah. And they're opting to do it on their own. I think about shows like, Bachelor, Bachelorette, where it's just like, okay, you're going to go on a date, you're going to say something vulnerable. They're not asking that person to go and like
Right.
recite their resume and all their accomplishments. They're like, tell them your deepest, darkest secrets. And it's like, that is a way that they have found that humans bond on that show. And so it's like not surprising that you see that kind of across the board of, oh, the person that we find most likable and that we can get to know the best is just as flawed of a human as we ourselves are flawed.
Yeah, it's true. And that's kind of a interesting comparison because it's like you watch them do that on The Bachelor and it's almost like formulaic, where it's like, okay, now it's time for you to open your heart. And it's like, well, what if they don't have a traumatic experience to share? They got to kind of like come up with something and take that versus, this is why I love Survivor, is it's like, it's just so real. Like, yeah, there's deceit. Yeah, there's, people not being totally honest about who they are. There's all of that. But also, you really can't hide a lot of things when you're camping with somebody for weeks on end.
No, you cannot. I mean, just being in an enclosed space where you cannot leave, like, you
Yeah.
can leave, obviously, by quitting, but
Right.
yeah, yeah, and you don't have any sort of distractions. It's not like they can be on their phones or doing anything else. You really don't have much energy besides going to get firewood and sitting around camp. So,
Right.
you have that. Um, so yeah, so what you were saying before, yeah, your thoughts create your experience of being on the show. You're impacted by stress levels. So even if you're very good at, I don't know, managing your mind, like I think about this all the time. I was just like, oh, if I was on a show like Survivor, yeah, I have coaching abilities, but would I have access to all my resources in that high stress environment when I'm not typically in a high stress environment? It'd be putting a lot of pressure on myself or anybody else to expect that
Right.
of them. I don't know about you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's like you go into it thinking like, yeah, I could totally do this. This is my plan. This is how it's going to be. I'm going to be fine because I have, these kinds of skills or resources or abilities or whatever. But yeah, I don't know how you can. I mean, I would be surprised if anybody's plan goes according to what they thought it would.
No, no, and you wouldn't want it to either. Like, I don't,
Right.
I think it would be a little bit weird if you went on Survivor and you were like, wow, that was exactly what I thought it was going to
Right.
be like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, from a coaching perspective, just watching Brandon get voted out, it was really sad because you can tell he's a super fan. You can tell he's wanted to be there forever. And it was, it's one of those things where it's like, if you were to make a highlight reel of his experience on Survivor, like what would you put in it? Because there was a lot of like really sad things, like him losing, him failing at the puzzles, having a panic attack, like his even like at the end his tribe choosing to vote him out over the unlikable Emily, who we all thought was like, oh, she's out of here. So from a coaching perspective, like what would you say to him? Like, because it would be
Mm.
so hard to leave that experience feeling good about yourself. And it sounds like he had a decent perspective on it in his talking head at the end, but man, that would be really hard to not walk away being like, well, I failed that Survivor run.
That's interesting. Like, that was almost not my take of him, even though we saw a lot of him on screen. Yeah, I think you could almost take it two different ways. He's almost one of those people where I think just getting on the show itself was that huge accomplishment, and whatever happened next was like, didn't matter. Because
Yeah.
he'd been working on it since 2008, but I don't know, it almost goes back to like this idea that we can only feel good about ourselves if we have certain accomplishments or, check certain boxes. Like, oh, I found an immunity aisle. He was given an option for it. He opted out. Like, oh, I did a special challenge that most people don't get to do. I did it and then I failed. But I mean, I guess like you could look at it in terms of effort. He did not give up. He tried as much
Yeah.
as he could on the show. He put himself out there, and I think that's the thing is that like we can control our actions, like what we do, but like we can't really control results, right? Because he could be like, if the yellow team, like if overall didn't lose, he could be like, well, that was hard, but I'm still here in the game, because my team didn't get to this result. So, I mean, so much of it is up to chance. But he just didn't get a chance to like have those winning moments that a lot of people had, like, oh my gosh, I won a challenge, I got immunity, I did all these things. And so, um, my guess is though that he probably feels, it's probably really hard to watch. And I can imagine it was so hard to watch himself have a panic attack and stuff. But at the same time, like he's doing something that most other people in the world don't get to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's true. I think like if I were him, I would be really proud of how I presented myself on the show. Like he really did seem like he was being who he is. And I just, like we could all see, even though we're watching him fail, we're also empathizing with him because we see that this isn't like who he is. He is not a failure, but we're watching him try and we're watching him have these great relationships with people, even in just the 5 days he was there. So I don't know. I don't judge him at all for anything he did because I mean, especially watching Hannah just like leave
Yeah.
last week, he stayed and he was going through a lot of the same discomfort and mental drama that she was. And he was willing to stay. He wanted to be there more than anything.
Yeah. There's a part of me that's a little relieved watching Brandon because,
Yeah.
like, his game is probably one of my worst case scenario situations. Like, if I was on Survivor, like having a panic attack in water,
Oh
plus,
my gosh.
like losing in the ways that he did, all of those things would be like, oh my gosh, what's the worst that can happen on Survivor? All of those things. Um, and so, but then you watch it and you're like, okay, well, yeah, that happened. But he still got to play. He seemed delighted. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is
Even
like,
Yeah, even getting his torch snuffed, he's like, "Oh my gosh, it's
Yay!
amazing."
He's like, Jeff Probst, talk to me. I mean, I get a sense from him that those are the things he'll talk about later of like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh, and I got to meet these people. So yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I think that's, it's like you go on the show and you just have this idea of like how you're gonna win. But man, you know what? In the edits, they probably could have found some moments where Brandon was like
oh yeah.
totally winning. But obviously this was his journey that they wanted to show.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's tough too, watching how you are perceived based on how a group of editors thought you should be perceived. So I'm sure he's probably like, "Hey, wait, I didn't just fail. I did some
Did all
things,
these
some
other
cool things."
things. I was very charming at camp.
When he was trying to when he was trying to start a fire with his glasses, I was like, "Oh man, if he could do that, what a win!" Of course, that didn't happen, but
Yeah, but I mean, I don't do like that almost speaks to though is that we want him to win so we can feel good about his game. But he's like, I don't need to win in order to feel good about my game. I'm here.
yeah, it's true. It's like you said, like feeling a little relieved. I feel a little relieved that he's done because it was hard to watch. Um, but yeah, I think that he's the kind of guy that I'm sure he could kind of frame his experience of it in a positive way. And we saw that he already was on his way out, so I'm not worried about him.
I'm not worried about him. And obviously, like maybe Hannah from last week takes the heat off of him because most people, if
Right?
they're gonna go online and like go say mean
Yeah,
things to anyone, it would probably be
that's true. Ugh,
for Hannah. I don't know the whole story there, but yeah, I had a lot of thoughts about that last week.
same. Me too.
What did we miss? Was there anything else we haven't talked about yet? I think we got to most everything.
I
Well,
think
let
so.
me ask you this, Kristen. Would you go on
Yeah,
Survivor? Would you
no.
apply? Why?
No, I, man, sometimes I think you can't help it when you watch Survivor. You wonder, like, could I do that? Would I do that? Would
Mm,
I want to do that? And I just don't think I really would. Part of it is the swimming situation. I just don't know that I could ever be. I'm not a good swimmer. The water kind of freaks me out. I think that would really give me anxiety is to have
yeah.
to do those water challenges. But I don't know. It's not one of those things that like calls to me. It's like, this is your destiny. You should do this. And I think like if you don't want it enough, you're never going to make it through the casting process. Like I think it's a pretty serious. You have to really want it to get onto Survivor.
You do have to really want it. Yeah, I know, because like in my mind, I'm like, okay, I apply, and now I have to go do these weird like Spartan mud races, or I guess they're not weird to the people that love them, but for me, it would be out of
Right.
character, and like I would have to go. I'm like in my mind, like yeah, swimming. Like I'd probably need swimming lessons again in the ocean. Like I'd have to spend time.
Right. Open
Like in my
water.
mind, it creates all of these things that now I need to do because I couldn't possibly just go on the show without
Right.
any
You got to learn to
prep.
make fire. Got to make sure you can do that with a flint.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think, I mean, for me, it's probably just like a control thing too. Like, oh my gosh, I'm freaking out about going on this game. What can I control? Well, all the prep that
exactly.
goes into it.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that you could just totally go overboard trying to be as prepared as you could possibly be. And then it's like you said, like you could be doing puzzles 8 hours a day and physical training, every single day and all of that and still get there and have it be completely different than what you thought. And you're not at all prepared for what happens. So what was that for? But I don't know. I think you could do well on Survivor Lynn. I think you should apply and then we can talk through how much you need to actually prepare yourself.
Oh, dang, Chrissy, you're like, please go. I will live vicariously through you. I don't
Yeah.
know. You know what's funny though? The things that I'm not worried about is like, oh yeah, being on a beach and having bugs around. Like none of that scares me at all.
Right.
Like that part of it. It really is just like I think it's you have flashbacks to like middle school and high school sports. Like
Yeah.
I tried volleyball for like one
Yeah.
semester and those girls were not nice. And so I think
Right.
in my mind it's just like, oh my gosh, that puts like Survivor High School, like maybe that's where I go back to.
Yes. that's actually the, like you saying that kind of helps me kind of clarify. I think I'm more scared of the tribe dynamics and kind of feel, because you watch them and it really is like a high school environment where there's the cool kids and the confident ones, and then there's the nerds, and sometimes the nerds bond together and they can have their own power, you know, but it's like, where do I fit in that? I mean, I think all of that would come rushing back to me. All my junior high trauma would come back and I wouldn't know. I'd be like, you know, my grown-up version of myself, but acting like my middle school version of myself. And I think would really, really stress me out. I don't want
You're
to do
like,
that at all.
it's not the work I want to do in my life. If I got to coach myself on anything, it's not like going back to high
Oh,
school.
yeah, I don't want to do that.
No. So this is where my brain goes when I start thinking about it. I'm like, there's no room for the fun that could be had. It's only drama, which maybe would make me perfect for the show.
It's true. Yeah, they're looking great. Good TV. Give them good
Good
TV
TV.
and they'll put you on the show.
We shall see. Well, was there anything else on your mind for today before we close things out?
Oh, I don't think so. I think we covered all of it. I mean, every time I watch Survivor, I think so much about what the players are thinking, why they're doing what, I mean, in reality TV, I'm thinking about why they're doing what they're doing. And is it a strategy? Is it a manipulation? Is it just who they are? Are they just crazy? And so I think it's so fun to be able to have this podcast format to be able to talk it through. And I've loved listening to the other season or the other, you know, series that you've recapped as well, because I'm always fascinated by human behavior, especially in these kind of manufactured environments where put people under stress and see what happens.
Totally. Yes. And I can't wait to text you every week to be like, oh my God, can you believe this happened? So we
I
will
know.
do.
Oh my gosh. I love Survivor. I can't wait to see the rest of the season.
Same, same. Okay. Well, if somebody wanted to find you online, where would they go looking, Kristen?
Well, if you're looking for marketing help, you can find my website at bykristinbrown.com. Kristin is Kristin. And you can also find me on Instagram at Kristin Brown. That's less business and just more fun stuff.
Yes. And it's very fun. So, well, thank you, Kristen, for coming on the show today. It's always good to see
Thank you
you.
for having me.